Hello, my name's Rich and this is an FPL tips video for game week 10. It's a new series that I'm going to be doing. Basically, we're going to pick a few topics that are pertinent to game week 10 and we're going to try and keep the video short and concise and basically look into a bit of data using the Fantasy Football Scout members area to try and answer tricky questions that have been asked for this week. So any feedback in the comments would be appreciated. Any suggestions for game week 11 and beyond. But let's get straight into it. So the first thing has been obviously the Hattrick Heroes for the game week. Now, originally, I was going to include just Foden and Trossard, but after the Monday night game, I thought I'd include Maddison as well. Now, obviously, there's an exclusion of Haaland, but I feel like it goes without saying that he's probably the best captain option this week. And if you don't have him, go and get him. So we're going to be working off that assumption. Now, what I've done here is I've used the Fantasy Football Scout comparison tool basically to compare all three of the players that I mentioned. So Trossard's got a hat-trick this week, Foden got a hat-trick this week, and Maddison, he got a brace and an assist as well. So they all got a hat-trick in some ways, just it was 3 attacking returns. That's also worth saying that all three of these players have had 5 goals this season. Trossard's had 1 assist and Foden and Maddison have had 2 assists. Now, obviously, looking at this, I mean, my initial thoughts before I delved into the data was that Foden was absolutely clear of these guys. I don't think it's really the case. I mean, Trossard, he's played a game less than Foden, but Foden obviously plays for the best attacking team possibly in the world, definitely in Europe, definitely in the Premier League. And if you look at this, Foden's only slightly ahead of Trossard. And I mean, it really, really surprised me. And I guess I had this bias. We're all captaining Haaland at the moment. So I guess it feels a bit nicer to have Foden because then you can potentially get not just the captain goal, but the assist, or Haaland can get the assist for Foden. But Trossard's numbers really stand out. And I know Joe earlier in the week was talking about this on the Scoutcast video, that he was even looking at captaining Trossard in a future game week. So yeah, just delving into this data, I mean, I think I'd still go Foden for the reasons I've just said. You know, Man City are the best attacking team in the league. He seems absolutely nailed at the moment. I'm recording this during the Champions League game, so Foden's not even started tonight. So with game week 10 in mind, he looks like a great option at home to Southampton. So Foden would be the one I'd be jumping on. Now, I included Maddison as well. His data doesn't look as good. Now, obviously, he scored a free kick on Monday night against Forest, which is going to be a low XG chance. But he's in incredible form at the moment. So, I mean, I wouldn't discount him, but for me, Trossard and Foden are just, completely clear. But I would go for Foden. An expected goal involvement of 3.97 over those 8 games. Edges Trossard, who's had a 3.39, although now Brighton have got a new manager. Maybe things are about to improve even further, and maybe it's that player. I remember when Trossard signed, into the league, went to Brighton. There was a lot of talk about him being the new Hazard, and it's never really materialised. He's been quite a frustrating asset to own, but I mean the underlying data looks good. He's playing in an attacking role. Again, that was mentioned on the Scoutcast. A lot of the time Potter played him at wing back. While that didn't hamper his XG at all, we were looking at players like Gross. So yeah, both of these are heavily on my radar, Foden and Trossard. Maddison less so. Like I don't own him, for full disclosure. So if I owned him, I'd be over the moon. I'd be delighted. I wouldn't be selling. But there's players that I'm probably going to be looking at more than Maddison, if I don't own. I mean, another player that's not even on this list, because he didn't score a hat-trick, was Wilf Zaha. And I mean, his fixtures look incredible right up to game week 16 with the World Cup. So for me, he's probably a priority as well over Maddison. And I even really like Saka. A bit like Zaha, he's on penalties as well. Because I guess one thing you could say with these 3 players that we got on screen, none of them are on penalties. And that can make a big difference come the end of the season. You can get 20 to 30 points for free, basically, when you start popping in the bonus points that they might get, if they're scoring the penalties. Obviously, Zaha's not that great at penalties, but I always, with penalties, I'm glass half full. I'm going to assume, it's 3 points. So, yeah, they're the, the hat-trick heroes, as it were, for the game week. We're going to move on now. I'm recording this, like I said, it's on Wednesday. So we haven't had much news on Mitrovic. We don't know if he was just being preserved because, you know, he was carrying that injury through the break for Serbia, and they were losing already against Newcastle. You know, they were down to 10 men. Or if it's an actual serious injury that we need to take, you know, a little bit more notice at and maybe look at removing Mitrovic. So what I've used here is basically the projections using the Rate My Team tool to have a look at the best strikers and possibly the best Mitrovic replacements. Now, I think the one key thing to say here is Mitrovic is obviously projected to get 1.95 points, and that, I assume, is because his minutes have been adjusted because potentially he's injured. So I would say, you know, if it wasn't for that, we have to remember that Mitrovic is basically, and I don't like using essential like too often, but I'm going to in this circumstance. I feel like Haaland, it goes without saying, I've mentioned it already, he's essential. I don't really think you can play the game without owning Haaland, and probably for this week without captaining him. Now, there's a lot of frustration around Mitrovic because a lot of people wildcarded to get him a couple of weeks ago or used a precious transfer to get him. And I think we just have to remember how good he's been, how good his underlying numbers have been, you know, the number of goals he's scored. You know, he's 90-minute man, he's the talisman, he's on penalties. You know, he ticks every single box and he does it for a good price. You know, he's only 6.9 million at the moment. So I feel like we don't replace Mitrovic, you know, just willy-nilly. We have to wait for news and find out what's going on, because I think personally, if I know that Mitrovic is going to be back in a week, maybe 2 weeks, you know, we might get vague news. I'm probably going to try and hold him and just use my bench fodder to keep Mitrovic in, because I feel that strongly about him and how important it'd be. And, you know, you'll sell him and then you'll want to buy him back because, you know, he's got that potential to go big for such a good price with those fixtures. So I'm not saying definitely sell him, but I think we have to look at the alternatives. Now, I feel like the big one last week, and a lot of people went for him, was Solanke, and I completely understand why. You know, he's, again, to mention these talisman players, that's what he was in the Championship for Bournemouth last season. We were also hoping with these fixtures, or people that bought Solanke were hoping with these fixtures, that Bournemouth being bottom of the expected goals table by an absolute mile is completely rock bottom. We had a video on Scout on the Scoutcast showing how bad Bournemouth have been. Andy Teach Mode even went to the game, and I guess he was hoping for an entertaining game of football, and he didn't get that. And the numbers, and you know, watching them on Match of the Day, it looked like a horrific match. So Solanke after that game has not improved. Bournemouth haven't improved attacking wise. So it makes me want to, even though the fixtures are good now, to wait a little bit for Solanke. I feel like if it was last week, Mitrovic was injured, maybe I'd have been a bit more willing to save that little bit of money. You know, and it's only like 1.2 million that we'd save. And I wouldn't want to start him every week. So, well, you know, if I own Solanke, I wouldn't be desperately trying to get rid of him. I'm a little bit cooler on him, and I'm willing to wait for Mitrovic. Now, if for any reason Mitrovic is out a long period of time, I feel like despite Tony's best fixture just having gone, and that's that Bournemouth game I mentioned that was awful, I feel like he's probably the clear replacement, because I guess you'll still have that money if you needed to go back to Mitrovic quickly. And Tony ticks a lot of boxes that Mitrovic ticks. You know, he's a similar price. There's 0.4 in it. So obviously you'd have to have the money to do that. And I mean, I wouldn't do a hit. I wouldn't remove Mitrovic for Tony for a hit. But, you know, Tony himself, all the boxes that Mitrovic ticks, you know, being that talisman, the penalties, the 90 minutes, the underlying data is still good as well. So I feel like just like for like, Tony would be the replacement I'd go for. But I think I'd want to wait if possible. And I hope we get clearer news. I really do. You know, like I say, I'm recording this on Wednesday. I don't want to lose Mitrovic. Personally, I'm happy just playing someone like Botman or Bailey. I'm sure people have got better benches than me. So yeah, so that's my thoughts there. You know, they completely threw in the towel when they were down to 10 men. So they're so good at home. You know, I'm not giving up on Fulham. I'm not giving up on Mitrovic. And I don't see, sometimes you're glad a player's injured because you can just bring in another replacement. I don't feel that's the case with Mitrovic. There's players like Bamford and Wilson. Potentially, you know, I don't feel like they're as nailed because they're they are injury prone or have been injury prone. I mean, they've shown it this season, to be fair. And they've consistently shown it in the past. So, I mean, they feel a little bit risky. Although, again, they do tick the penalties box. So, I mean, if you're feeling a little bit more adventurous, maybe you could go for a Wilson or a Bamford. I just don't see much in this. And I mean, if he was out long term, I think I'd even look at bringing the money down if you can still get through the blank and then get that money into midfield. I think that would be my preference. But yeah, it's a really tough one. I hope we get more information. But to wrap it up, Tony would be my replacement if I could do it not for a hit and Mitrovic was out for a long time. Solanke, yeah, I guess he'd do. But I want to see a little bit more from him and a little bit more from Bournemouth before I make that decision. So now we're going to move on to, now this is a different one. So it's a different position. It's going back to midfielders again. Now this is actually, so a bit where we want to discuss the 5-point-ish mids. Because maybe some people want to look at going freemium. Maybe they don't, but we had good performances again from Almiron and Xhaka, for example. I myself have Bailey. So I thought it was something to look into, quickly, because it depends on your team structure. Maybe you are shopping around in the bargain basement bin. So what I've got here is these stats are from this season. Quite simply, it's XGI. These are midfielders that are sorted by XGI, and they're under 5.5 million using the scout table. So you can see actually right at the top is Almiron. And, from reading Newcastle forums, it seems like he's pretty much undroppable at the moment, even with Wilson coming back and and with Isak coming back as well. It would feel harsh from what they're saying for him to be dropped. I know he had a lot of potential when he came into the league. People were very excited about him all that time ago, and it's never really materialised for him. But I mean, he's up there with his teammate Joe Willock with 0.47 XGI over the season, with Solly March just behind, which is interesting. Then you got Harvey Elliott, Damari Gray, Gibbs White, Podence, and Bobby De Cordova-Reid. Now they're the top few. They're all above 0.3 XGI per game, which, to be honest, for their prices, I mean, it's not great. It's not great, but it's not bad either. What I've then done is I've searched for Bailey and Xhaka because they weren't showing up high enough in the table. I was quite surprised with Xhaka playing, much more advanced, that he's down at 0.24 expected goal involvement. These are per 90 as well. Sorry, not over the season. These are per 90. So he's actually quite low. And there's so many Arsenal players you could go for. Again, on the Scoutcast, we were talking about this because there's Jesus, for example, who I didn't mention as a Mitrovic replacement. But potentially, if you can get through that blank, maybe getting Jesus in would be, a nice thing to do. So then you've got Saka, you've got Martinelli, and I mean the defenders as well. Saliba has been a hero for some people. I really like owning Gabriel. There's Zinchenko. There's Ben White's cheap. I think people are giving up on Ramsdale, but there's so much choice at Arsenal. So I feel like this kind of shows that Xhaka, there's just so many reasons not to do it. I mean, maybe he's a good pick. If you're playing draft FPL, for example, and he's on the waivers, it feels like that kind of pick. Maybe you could pick him up. But I feel like for your actual FPL team, I think surprisingly, Almiron would be clear of him. And Bailey, the player I own, I got him because he's 4.7 million. I'm always nervous about his minutes. He's been starting recently, but then he does get subbed off early. Again, his data's not great. 0.27 XGI per 90. So surprisingly, Almiron, after Monster Haul at the weekend, he looks like the one, to be honest. So we'll move on now to the final tip for the week. So we've covered midfielders, we covered strikers, so we've got to cover premium defenders as well, because I feel like there's a lot of people losing patience with the premium defenders. So quite simply, what I thought I'd do is I'd sort all the defenders this season by XGI to see are the premium defenders worth it. And I mean, unsurprisingly, Trent is top and Reece James is second. You'll have to ignore Kaletakar. He's only played, he's a Southampton defender. I think he's Croatian. He's only played one game for them. So that's a bit of an outlier. So I apologise for leaving that in. But I mean, it shows, so Trent, Reece and Trippier are very popular defenders. And I mean, they are the top three, but they're not that far clear. I mean, I mentioned Arsenal defenders. Gabriel is 0.17. He's going to be a great option after the blank. But this does show that Trent is still the top. He's expensive, but he's still the most attacking defender in the game based on underlying data for this season, followed by Reece James, who's a personal favourite of mine. So it's a tough one. I feel like I wouldn't be selling them, but I also wouldn't be ripping my team up to get them in. There's going to be a place for them. I think after this blank game week's gone, we're going to be wanting players like Trent back if we don't have them already. A lot of people have Reece James. I know there's people thinking, is it worth going Perisic to Reece James? Potentially, yes. I mean, Perisic isn't showing on this list. Obviously, a big reason for that is probably, I mean, first of all, he's probably not been as good as he's been hyped up to be with his data. So, that's one of the main reasons. But also his minutes, and you're not going to give the best value that you can. A bit like Trent's doing, or could do, or a bit like Trent's done over the last few seasons. Not like he's doing this season. But he's also been unlucky. I feel like he didn't get that assist at the weekend. That could have changed the narrative a bit. Obviously, they're not keeping clean sheets, and that's the bread and butter. But I just feel like with the premium, you're paying for the attacking output as well. And again, Cancelo's not showing on this list as well. It's actually quite surprising. The Liverpool guys are still right up there. Robertson and Trent. Maybe the defenders just aren't as good this year. A lot of us thought they were underpriced. Maybe they weren't, but I think that was slightly by accident. I don't think we expected such drop off from Liverpool. Chelsea have been disappointing with the number of clean sheets, but at least Reece James appears to be nailed again now. So yeah, there's not much of a conclusion here. The conclusion, I think, is I would stick with the ones you have, but there's plenty of cheap options if you need to go for them. And I feel like actually players that don't, when you're looking at the cheaper players, then you might just look a bit more at the clean sheet data. So what I've done here is I've basically got, they're all 20 Premier League teams, and the number of goals they've conceded are in the second column, and the expected goals conceded are in the right-hand column. So you can see, I mean, I think most people would guess that, that Man City and Arsenal would be right up there. And it's a shame they're the two teams that blank in game week 12. And I think it's why we've got, so many weird dilemmas at the moment. Brighton, obviously new manager. So let's see if they can continue, because Duncan Webster are massively on my radar right now. But I do think after the blank, despite all the good options, I haven't even mentioned Palace. They're low down here, but they've got very, very, very good fixtures. So I think players like Guehi at 4.3, they're going to be very tempting. But when we get past that blank game week, I feel like we're all going to be wanting to pile back into City, Arsenal, and probably Trent as well. With that run of fixtures, I wouldn't feel that comfortable without Trent. So I feel like it's not the time to be selling them, but it's also not the time to be buying them. And I do think there's going to be a lot of investment after the blank. This blank game week, it's probably been the worst two teams it could be, unless you want a bit of chaos, because it's completely blown everything apart. So my conclusion for this is basically I'll be very cautious with the moves I make. I mean, personally, I haven't got Cancelo, I haven't got Trent, and I'm thinking of ways, how am I going to get them back after the blank? Now, that table I showed before, Cancelo's not actually showing in that. His attacking data has not been that great, although he has just got an assist tonight in the Champions League. And I feel like with Cancelo, the big thing for him is look at Man City. They are, the best defensive team in the league, and he's the most nailed defender. So, I mean, maybe someone like, you could gamble on someone like Akanji after the blank, and that's maybe what I'm hoping, but I can't rely on it. So I feel like I'm going to have to get a plan to actually, despite all I've said, try and get those players in the future game weeks after the blank. But I thought this is really interesting. I mean, Brighton obviously really, really stand out, but Arsenal for me, they're the ones, and it's why I'm struggling. Going back to the previous topic, I wouldn't want to waste a spot on Xhaka. I'd want at least one defender, either Gabriel or Saliba. They seem like the ones. Gabriel's despite the points, Gabriel's got the better attacking data than Saliba. So I made a little joke on the Scoutcast that Saliba had been lucky. And I do kind of think he has. I do think, looking at all the numbers and what we know about Gabriel, if they're both nailed, then Gabriel is probably going to be the better pick for after the blank. So that wraps up my tips for game week 10. Now, like I said at the start of the video, please comment below, any feedback you have. This is the first time I've done a video basically talking to myself in my spare bedroom. So I'd appreciate any feedback. And also for game week 11, if you can put suggestions in the comments, even after the weekend, and then I can prepare, some hot topics for game week 11, and we can get, exactly what you want. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe, all that good stuff. And thank you for joining me, and good luck for game week 10. And please, 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 Captain Haaland.